Hello, and welcome back to the MBC Super Podcast, the most super podcast that you are currently listening to right now. As you know, for this podcast, the idea is to jump off of or build off of the Sunday sermon and kind of get into the weeds a bit, maybe get a little more theological, get a little bit more practical, whatever else comes up. Normally, Pastor Don is with me and I'm asking him questions, but as you know, he's on sabbatical, which segue into the Sunday sermon because Pastor Walter, who is preaching, briefly talked about sabbatical and the idea of taking a time to rest and recuperate and to grow in different areas. But seeing as Pastor Walter already talked about that, I'm not going to get into that too much. But as for the rest of the sermon, Pastor Walter preached from, where is it here? Hebrews 3, verses 7 to 19, as well as chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. And this passage talks about a Sabbath rest. Now, Pastor Walter did briefly talk about where the Sabbath comes from, right? It's rooted in creation. God worked for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, he rested. And then when Moses gave the law, or I guess technically God gave the law through Moses, the Israelites were instructed that they had to rest on the seventh day. They could work 6 days, but on the seventh day had to rest. And that was a reflection of God resting on the seventh day of creation. As for the passage in Hebrews, Walter pointed out that the main point of that passage is it's talking not about the seventh day of the week, but about this final rest that Christians look forward to, right? So he did briefly talk about how right now Christians have rest in terms of salvation, that because Christ accomplished the work of redemption on the cross, we don't have to work to earn it. We get to rest in what Christ has done. But the passage is mostly talking about that final rest, which Pastor Walter pointed us to Revelation 21 and 22, right? This final new creation where sin is absolutely totally done away with, and we get to rest in life the way that God intended it, more or less. That's what the sermon was about. And in the meantime, of course, we need to encourage one another and strengthen one another in the faith to stay strong, looking forward to that final rest, right? So, great sermon. If you didn't hear it, check it out. But I want to focus in on basically a throwaway line that Pastor Walter mentioned, that different people, different Christians might have different views about the Sabbath and what it means to keep the Sabbath now and in the new covenant. And he didn't really want to get into that because that's not what the passage was about. He wanted to focus on what the passage in Hebrews was talking about. But when I heard him say that, my ears pricked up, or whatever you want to say. And I thought, well, that's a perfect topic for the podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The question of, as Christians, how should we view the Sabbath? Now, to begin, we'll just go to where we first see it show up in the law, Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. And it says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigners residing in your towns. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So, the seventh day, the Israelites were instructed to rest. You work all the other days, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, which today we would understand as Saturday, the last day of the week, you must rest from all your work. And you shouldn't work, and nobody in your household should work. Nobody even living among you, even if they aren't part of Israel, if they're a foreigner, even they have to rest from their work. And obviously, this was a very big part of the Jewish life, and it was very significant, and they took it very seriously. Of course, as you may know, the Pharisees came up with a whole bunch of extra laws about exactly what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. But we're getting in the weeds, but we don't want to get in those weeds yet, or right today. So I'm getting in the weeds, but I'm staying out of the other weeds, if that makes sense. And there's that whole thing about Jesus healing people on the Sabbath and the controversy between him and the Pharisees. We're not getting into that. We're focusing, as Christians today, right now, what do we do with the Sabbath? How should we view it? And there are different views. And again, this isn't meant to be exhaustive, but I'm just going to briefly go through what I think are kind of 4 main ways that you could view the Sabbath. And if you're listening right now and you view it in a way that I didn't come up with, I'm sorry. I can't come up with everything that every single person on the planet believes about the Sabbath. But there's 4 main points that I think are that I think are main views on the Sabbath. So the first one is pretty simple line of thinking, like not hard to understand. And that is that because the Sabbath exists in the Old Testament, we should still follow it today, right? The 10 Commandments, out of all the 10 Commandments, we would read them as, don't worship an idol, honor your father and mother, don't murder, don't steal, right? These are all things that we would consider, we still have to follow those today. It's not like we're free to go out and covet my neighbor's oxen now. There's all of the other 10 commandments. We say, we have to keep following these. We can't just break these commands now. And so the logic is, therefore the Sabbath we also have to keep. Right? In Matthew 5, verses 17 to 18, Jesus says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." And so people who hold this view would say, the law has not been done away with. We still have to follow these things. There's also different denominations that, because of this, they hold their church service on Saturday instead of Sunday, because Saturday is the Sabbath. And so, the next kind of view is that we must keep the Sabbath, but Sunday's the new Sabbath. Okay, so basically this is the idea that, yes, we have to keep the Sabbath. We need a day to rest, a day dedicated to God, but it doesn't have to be Saturday. It actually should be Sunday, because that's when we see a pattern of the church starting to meet on Sunday, because it was the Lord's Day, right? The day that Jesus rose from the dead. Acts 20 verse 7, for example, talks about that. It says, on the first day of the week, they came together to break bread. So we seem to see this pattern. Oh, it's the first day of the week that they meet together, they break bread. This is the new Sabbath. And there are many people who therefore will not work on Sundays. And I've even known people who they won't even go out to eat on a Sunday, because now you're making someone else work for you on the Sabbath. So they will not do anything on Sundays for themselves to work or to make others work. And so that's another view. A third view is that there's no more need to keep the Sabbath. So when Jesus said that he came to fulfill the law, this view would hold that Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath, and so we don't have to keep it anymore. Like, it's done. Jesus is the fulfillment of that. So there's kind of two texts that would point in this direction. The first one would be Acts 15, verses 19 to 20. It says, "It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood." So this is the Council of Jerusalem. They're debating the issue of circumcision. Do the Gentiles have to be circumcised? And I don't have it down here. I'm pretty sure it was James. I could be wrong on that. But one of the apostles steps up and says, we shouldn't make it hard. We shouldn't force them to follow all of the regulations of the Jewish law. But instead, here are a few things that they should do. And notably, they don't say, oh, they must keep the Sabbath. So it appears that keeping the Sabbath, at least for the Gentiles who were coming to faith, was not an important requirement. Like, oh, they must also keep the Sabbath. They didn't mention it. They mentioned not eating food polluted by idols, so not being a part of idol worship, abstaining from sexual immorality, and then also not eating blood of animals or animals that were strangled. There are some more weeds that we're not going to get into today about animals and blood and can I eat a rare steak? We won't get into that. But the point is anyways that this passage doesn't reiterate that Gentiles now have to also observe the Sabbath. And then Colossians 2 verses 16 to 17, probably the most used for this view. It says, therefore, this is Paul obviously writing it, therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. Hear that? Or a Sabbath day. Don't let anyone judge you. And he continues, verse 17, these are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So this passage is saying, don't let people judge you about whether or not you eat or drink things, whether you regard a religious festival, or whether you observe a moon celebration or a Sabbath day. Because all these things in the Old Testament, the point wasn't the thing itself. The point wasn't the Sabbath itself. It was pointing to Christ. It was a shadow pointing to Christ, and Christ fulfilled this, right? There's a shadow, but the reality, the real Sabbath, is found in Christ, right? And so this is the idea, again, pointing to what Pastor Walter talked about, how we have a rest in terms of our salvation. We have a resting in Christ because of what he's done for us. And then we also have that final rest, right? And so the important thing isn't the actual day of the week, but that it was pointing to Christ and what he accomplished. And then the final view, or the final of the four views that I came up with anyways, is that the idea of the Sabbath rest is what is important. So it's not the letter of the law of like, you literally have to keep this day and you can't do any work and nobody else can do any work. The importance is not the actual day or the actual what you're doing. Well, okay, I'll stick with the importance isn't the day of the week, but the principle or the idea or the spirit of the law that is taking time to rest. Just as God rested, so we also should rest. And so this view would be like, you don't. It doesn't have to be a Saturday. Doesn't even have to be Sunday. Maybe your Sabbath day is Wednesday or Thursday, and you take time to rest. Literal to rest from work, but more importantly, to rest in God and to dwell on Him and worship Him. And so that's kind of the third view. It's not about the day per se, but this idea of having regular rest in your life. So, which view makes the most sense? What makes the most sense to you? To me, what I think makes the most sense, the most consistent, is the third view, that we don't need to keep the Sabbath. We aren't under the law of the old covenant. We are under grace in the new covenant. And keeping the Sabbath is not a requirement that we have to do. Ultimately, it was fulfilled by Christ. He is our Sabbath rest. And so we don't have to. But that also doesn't mean you can't. Whereas, I suppose there's the issue of circumcision, where Paul really pushes against it, because no, you're trying to earn salvation through works. Don't do this. But the Sabbath, I mean, if you're keeping the Sabbath because you think you need to in order to be saved, then yeah, that is wrong. That is a misunderstanding of the gospel and of salvation. But if you believe in your heart that you should take time to rest from your work, to rest in God, and I mean, now I'm getting a little sidetracked, my head's jumping all over the place. There is the practical aspect of resting from work is a good thing. That's why we have a weekend. And fun fact, did you know that the weekend sort of largely originated because Jewish people observed the Sabbath on Sunday. Jews observed the Sabbath on Saturday. Christians observed Sunday as the day of worship, the day to rest from working. And so factories kind of decided, well, if we got a whole bunch of people skimping out on Saturday and a whole bunch of other people skimping out on Sunday, just give everybody both days off. And actually, apparently, it was really good for their productivity. So that's why the weekend exists, sort of. But anyways, get back to the line of talking, or the line of thinking that I was talking about. Man, I am so scatterbrained. I wish that I could edit this out, or it wasn't just one take go, but it has to be, because I don't have the time to sit down and spend hours editing it. It's kind of one shot. Whatever I say, whatever comes out, that's what ends up on the video. So I guess I should be careful. But anyways, getting back to the Sabbath. Some people feel really strongly that they should take a day, whether it's Saturday or Sunday, or maybe another day, and they should rest, and they should use that time to focus on God and dwell on His Word and do it for His glory. And if you believe that, if you feel like really strongly this is something you should do, then do it. In fact, it'd actually be wrong if you felt really strongly that you need to keep the Sabbath, but then you go against your conscience. That's actually wrong. You shouldn't go against your conscience, because then, even if it's not necessarily a sin, you're sinning in as much as you're doing what you believe is wrong. So anyways, that's a whole nother side topic, more weeds that we could get into. But what should we do, right? Again, myself, I don't think there's a need to keep a Sabbath day, because Christ fulfilled it. But I also try very hard to not work on Sundays, which now is technically impossible because I'm working for the church. But I don't really count that. That church work that's okay, right? But I'm talking about other work, or even when I was in school, I would try very hard to not have to do any schoolwork on Sunday, because Sunday was my day of rest. People have different views, and we need to honor and respect them in that. And this comes out of the Bible too. Romans 14, verses 5-6. Paul is talking about different people with a strong or a weak conscience. You know, some people think it's a sin to eat meat sacrificed to idols, then they shouldn't do it. And if you're with them, you shouldn't eat meat around them because it could be harmful to their conscience if you're doing it in their presence. So it's better to eat vegetables in front of somebody who believe it's a sin to eat meat sacrificed to idols than it is to eat that meat and now cause a potential stumbling block for them. And in talking about this, he says this: one person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. So what should we do? He continues, each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God, and whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. So, if you keep the Sabbath, whether it's Saturday or maybe you want to keep Sunday as the Sabbath for you, do so to the Lord, and that's an honorable thing. If you don't keep the Sabbath, then do so to the Lord, living for the Lord every day, of course, but not keeping the Sabbath because you are resting in the work that Christ has done, which is not isolated to one day. 7 days a week, we rest in what Christ has done. Then that person also does so to the Lord. So I hope this is a helpful video. Maybe it got you thinking. Maybe it helped you work through this. Maybe you never thought about it before. Maybe you've thought about it a lot and it was just a helpful rehash. I don't know. But let us just take that reminder, right? That whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, or whether you keep the Sabbath or not, in a literal sense, do so to the glory of God. God bless.